Hello and welcome back, and today I'm sanding hiking sticks. I'm doing it manually. That's how I finish my sticks. The first part of my sanding process will involve me using a drill with a rotary sanding disc. You would have seen that if you've looked back through my back catalogue. And this disc here is an 80 grit sanding disc, so I can achieve a vast quantity of wood being taken off. It's heavily used, so in reality it's probably about 100 grit, but that is my first stage of sanding on my sticks, and we'll discuss it a little bit more in a moment. But first off, I'll get a hiking stick and we'll have a look at how that finishes the stick to this point. Right, you can see I've got the two with wood spirits. I've got to finish just giving them a bit of a touch up. And as you can see, this is how my sticks finish up. You can see on the completely stripped ones how much they've had wood taken off by the sanding. You can actually see the grit marks in the wood. And you can see the wood looking a little bit powdery, furred up, where actually fibres have been pulled back out of the wood. But it hasn't done a bad job for that first stage. But if you look closely, you can see the rotary motion of the disc. I've now got to remove that and take out any scratch marks from that disc. But it's my first stage of sanding to get it to this point. Right then, sandpaper comes with a number on it which denotes how coarse it is, and that is usually on the back of the sandpaper or the disc or the pad that you're going to use. That is only as good as when you buy it new. Once you start using it, the coarseness will gradually drop off. Like I said, if something starts off as an 80 or 60 grit, within a few uses the coarseness can drop away. I never throw my sandpaper away till it's at a point it's ragged and you can't use it. So quite often on the back of the sandpaper it may say 60, 80, 100 or 120, but in reality, because it's been used so many times, it would have dropped way down the actual coarseness grade, and I will be using 100 grit, where somebody using new sandpaper would be using possibly 180, maybe 200 grit new paper, quite simply because it's been used so extensively. The coarseness is not evaporated, but disappeared over time. Eventually it gets to the point I have to throw sandpaper away, and looking at my box, I'm pretty much so sure I'm going to have to go through that, sift through it and start with new sandpaper. I don't throw sandpaper away just for the sake of it. Like I say, I use it all the way through its life, but just in different stages of my sanding. It may start off as a coarse sandpaper, but by the time I finish with it, it's probably mid-range or possibly even at the lower end of the sanding bracket. But yeah, like I said, I do need to start thinking about replacing it. I like to get my money's worth from it because it's a commodity. Some people will say it's cheap, but when you're doing hiking sticks in the volumes I do, you could very easily just be getting new sandpaper every batch of hiking sticks, and you would not be financially getting your money's worth. So let's have a little look. You can see this one here is a 60 grit. So 60 and 80 would be extremely coarse, and I would only use that if I was taking a knot away or something like that. This would be too aggressive to get a nice quality sand. And then you've got to figure out whether you're sanding a bark stick or just a complete. Sanding the bark patches requires you to start further down the coarseness. I would be starting at 120 on the bark and being very light with that. whereas I could probably start at possibly 100 on the actual stripped stick, just quite simply I'm not trying to save the bark, so I can be just that little bit more aggressive. And because I've got a more volume that I want to sand, obviously I don't want to be sanding forever, so I can start a little bit more aggressive. One thing worth noting though is sandpaper. You can see I've pulled a bit out of my box which has found its way in there, and I've used this to sand some filler out of a wall. Quite simply, if I use that on a hiking stick here, I could push white powder into the fibres, which would mean I could end up tainting the wood. So you do not want to cross-contaminate your wood that you're sanding with anything that could have been on that sandpaper previously. This here would possibly just mean, because it's like a powdery substance, I would have to sand it out that little bit more harder, more vigorously than I would if, you know, it was just straightforward sandpaper. But it's extra effort and time I wouldn't want to do. Some contaminants on your sandpaper though may actually dye, stain, or contaminate the wood to a point you can't get rid of it unless you start taking wood away again, which is something you might not want to do. Or if you've got a very intricate stick, you might not be able to do that and still have the look you originally started with. So always be aware of contaminants on your sandpaper. So how do I achieve my sanding routine, or how I go about achieving the look that I produce on my hiking sticks? How I do my hiking sticks will be vastly different to somebody else, and in fact it's almost a signature to your own individual style, how you sand. And even some people have little secrets that they keep about how they go about sanding. But for the record, like I said, I start off with the disc rotary sander, quite aggressive. This one's been used, so it's not what it says on the back, to achieve a look that you've just seen there. I will then come back and I will be on something like this, and that's 120, and I'll work with my hand. This will be either in a wooden block with a sponge pad on the top, just fold it around like that. Obviously the sandpaper will be cut to size, and I'd be sanding away like that. That gives a nice hard force or pressure on the wood in the area I'm sanding. If I feel I don't want to add so much pressure, I'll just use one of these sanding sponges, and that allows for you to sand, and it will bend around all the surfaces and curves in the stick. It's quite a useful thing to have in its own right. From 120, I will start dropping down to these fine grits, and when you get down to the fine grit, it's a lot of elbow grease, because from here it's almost like polishing. You've just got to keep going up and down till you take out all those marks that have been left from the 120. This one here says it's 100 grit, so that's still fine, but because this is heavily used, as you can see, this is probably about 180 grit in reality, but it started life as 100 grit. I would then come down to this one here, actually says fine on it, and to feel it, there doesn't feel like there's much grit or much abrasiveness to this. But when you start working it on the wood, you will notice a difference straight away, because it will start closing the fibers and it will start giving you that look that you want. So yeah, I move on to the fine, and then to finish with, as you can see, I've used quite a few of these. I use a decorator's sponge. Now these here are very flexible, and they're impregnated with a grit surface. Yet again, you can get in different variations of grit. I always go for the medium to smooth or fine, and with this I then polish along the stick and everywhere I want to polish, and that will bring up a real nice wood look. The whole wood will be closed. There won't be much in the way of shaping or production or sanding marks, and it just closes the wood and gives me that nice look on the wood. Almost some parts will be like a mirror finish, like ivory. So yeah, that's how I finish up. So the only thing to say on this where sanding is concerned, when you're sanding bark, the whole reason you've left bark on is because you want that natural look. So you have to take the flakiness off or any damaged bits of bark or bark that's going to lift, but underlying all that, it requires more attention with sanding than you do this. This you can get straight to the job and just do the motion, go down through the grits and get the result you want. How much effort you put into sanding this will dictate how much of the result that you're going to get at the end, or your desired result you're looking for. When you're working bark, as you can see here, there's a bit of a crusty patch there. The 120 will probably take that off and leave it a little bit patchy, but I will work that in as I go down through the grades so it blends in. There are bits on this which will actually be taken off with the sandpaper, and it will still have underlying bark which once it's oiled will still pop out. But it all takes a lot more care and attention. Do not start heavy on bark. Always start way down the scale, and then you can always come up if you feel like it. But I would always suggest it's better off putting more effort in the sanding with a lower grade sandpaper than to go aggressive because you're trying to save time. Because once you remove the bark, you cannot put it on. So with a bark stick, always start at a lower grade and see how you go, even if it requires you to put extra time into the sanding process. Even though I'm not mechanically sanding, I'm outdoors and that, I'm still sanding. It does create a lot of dust, particularly when you're doing a volume of sticks. I'm still using a respirator. At the moment it's not a scorching hot day, but they do get uncomfortable and it's tempting to take them off, but I would not recommend that. I would say use your protection because you only get one set of lungs, so take care and use your respirator. So I've got this bark stick. I'm going to start on 120. So this is quite abrasive. It's not a used 120. And I'm just going to try and take some of this scale off. I'm being very light with it, and I can see the scale coming off. So I've done a few passes up on this bit here, and you can see that I've got a lot of the scale off already, and that's what I'll drop down to the next grade now because I don't want to damage the colours and the bark underneath. So I'll bring you across. That's what it did look like. You can see the scale on it there. The difference is blatantly obvious. Right, you can just see the mechanical scratches there from the rotary sanding, and it's in kind of a circular motion, and they're extremely obvious like that. So, bring you along, let that focus in. You can see I've been sanding this in a straight motion up and down, and it looks a lot better already like that. It looks more obvious with that circular motion of sanding. Well then guys, I've finished sanding all these sticks. They're completed and they're sanded to how I like them to go forward to the next stage, which is the metal tips or copper tips being fitted. I'll then go in to do the wood burning. From there I'll do the finishing product to be added, and then it'll be a clean up and add the lanyard. So I'm still a way off yet from completing these, but I can go into the workshop and put these 6 through. They've been sanded to a point how I like them to be sanded, because I like to give it a kind of look from the backwoods, kind of a Blair Witch kind of feel to it. Not fully commercially produced items which don't have no soul. These that you can see processing marks, you can see the natural marks within the sticks on a lot of occasions. They don't look like basically a broomstick that you could have pulled out of a hardware store and turn into a hiking stick. There is something natural about them. There's something that you can look at and say, hey, that has a unique style. And the sanding that I've shown you goes a long way to make that happen. Everybody will have their own unique type of sanding or how they want to present their sticks. You know, all crafters put something of themselves at all stages into their final product. I'm no different, and this is how I like mine to go out, and how I like my kind of feel to go out to the customer. So yeah, all that's left to be said is take care, stay safe, and I hope to catch you guys on the trail.